Hi guys, Mrs. Arnowski here. I'm going to walk you through how to do all of the questions on the CBA practice test that we did in class on Friday. Hopefully, if you didn't understand how to do some of the questions, you can use this to help you figure them out. Please, please, please keep in mind that your CBA is coming up on November 3rd. Okay, so we need to make sure that we are ready for that. So if there are any questions that you are still having a hard time on, even after watching this video and doing some additional practice problems, please make sure that you come in and see me sometime so that I can review with you how to do those. So let's go ahead and get started then. Question number 1 said, if p of x is negative 2x plus 2x squared minus 4, and g of x is negative 5 plus 10x minus 6x squared, what is g of x plus p of x equal? So all it's asking us to do is take this expression and add it to this expression. So all I need to do is bring down, since it's adding, the two expressions and add them together. Now remember, when you add expressions together, you have to only combine like terms. So what goes together here? Well, the x squared terms, 2x squared and negative 6x squared go together. So 2 plus negative 6 is negative 4x squared. Then negative 2x goes with positive 10x. Negative 2 plus 10 is positive 8x. And last but not least, negative 4 and negative 5 go together. Negative 4 plus negative 5 is negative 9. So the option that showed this response was C. Okay? Combining like terms. Number 2 says perform the indicated operation. Now, since the two sets of parentheses are right next to each other, that means multiply. So the way that we showed you guys how to do this problem is to set up a box. We have 2 terms in the first set of parentheses and 3 terms in the second set of parentheses. So we are going to need our box to be 2 by 3. And don't be afraid to make it big so that you don't have to cram everything into a tiny little box, because then it's easier to make mistakes. So we have 3a minus 4, and we have a squared minus 5a times minus 6. And what we're going to do now is multiply to get the stuff in each box. So a squared times 3a, that's 3. This is an invisible 1, so 3. A squared times a is a cubed. Okay? 1a squared times negative 4 is negative 4a squared. 3a times negative 5a is negative 15. A times a is a squared. Negative 4 times negative 5a is positive 20a. 3a times negative 6 is negative 18a. And negative 4 times negative 6 is positive 24. So now our goal is to combine like terms. So I see that I have a squareds here and here. So those two will go together. And I have just an a here and here. So those two will go together. The other 2 terms, the first and the last, are by themselves. So I have 3a cubed. Negative 4 plus negative 15 is negative 19a squared. 20a plus negative 18a is positive 2a. And then a positive 24. So that matches up with answer A. Okay, so number 2 is multiply. Go ahead and set up the box. Number 3, identify which expression is equivalent to x to the 1/3 power. Now, remember, the bottom number is always the root. So when I go to set up a radical expression, that number right there is the root. So this is the third root of x. The top number then is your exponent, but here since it's 1, we don't have to write down that it's the cubic root of x to the first power. If it was something other than 1, that's when you would set up the parentheses and put the power out there. But since, again, it's just a 1, we don't necessarily have to write that. Now that option didn't show up in A, B, or C, so that's why the correct answer here was D. The answer I have is not listed above, but this is right here the correct answer. Okay? Number 4, simplifying the rational expression. So the first thing you should remember is that when you have a power out on the outside here, we're going to make sure that that power gets put on everything on the inside. And when I do that, I'm going to rewrite the problem. So I have 4 squared x to the third to the second. And remember, power to a power means you multiply over 8 to the 1/3, not y to the 9th times 1/3. Because again, power to a power is multiply. And now I'm going to simplify. So 4 squared is 16. X to the 3 times 2 is x to the 6th. 8 to the 1/3 power. Remember, what that means when you have a fraction is we're looking for what number do you multiply together 3 times to get 8. 1 times 1 times 1? No. 2 times 2 times 2? Yes. So the 1 on the top means we only need one of those 2's. So we get 8 to the 1/3 power is 2. Y, 9 times 1/3 is 3. 1/3 of 9 is 3. So y to the third. We're not quite done yet. There's one thing left that we can simplify. The 16 divided by 2 is 8. X to the 6th over 1y to the third. Okay, so that matches up with answer B. All right, number 5. Now, we have 2 minus 6i squared. And I can't just put the squared on both things because of that minus sign in there. So remember, what does squaring something really mean? It means multiplying it by itself. So that means I have 2 minus 6i times itself. And again, I'm going to do like I did in number 2 and set up a box. This one's only a 2 by 2 though. So I have 2 minus 6i times 2 minus 6i. So I have 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times negative 6i is negative 12i. 2 times negative 6i is negative 12i. Negative 6i times negative 6i is positive 36i squared. So we need to combine like terms. I have negative 12i combines with negative 12i. But remember that little rule that says I squared is negative 1. So this I squared here, I'm going to cross off and replace it with negative 1. So that gives me 36 times negative 1, which changes this to a negative 36. So now when I combine like terms, I can combine 4 and negative 36 together. 4 minus 36 is negative 32. Negative 12i minus 12i is negative 24i. And that's my final answer. So that matches up with option B. Okay? Number 6. Here you should notice the minus sign between them. So again, we're going to be combining like terms like we did with number 1, but the minus sign gives us one extra step. we have to make sure that that minus sign gets distributed to both of the terms in the second polynomial. So I'm going to rewrite this now. 5 minus 2i stays as is. And then we have minus 8 minus 6i. So now I can combine like terms. So 5 matches up with negative 8. 5 minus 8 is negative 3. Negative 2i minus 6i. Negative 2 minus 6 is negative 8i. And that matches up with option C. Okay? All right, 7 and 8 is asking us to interpret the graph. So number 7 says interpret the y-intercept. So remember, the y-intercept is the starting point of the graph where the line crosses the y-axis. And it crosses at 150. And that's our starting point. And you can see that that's when x is 0. So A, there is no y-intercept on this graph is wrong because it is 150. Says there is still a cost even if 0 bikes are produced. That's true. For 0 bikes being produced, there's a cost of $150. Okay. And then C says producing 1 bike costs $160. Well, that's true, but that doesn't have anything to do with the y-intercept. So that's why our answer here is B. Okay. Number 8 says interpret the end behavior. Well, the end behavior shows that the line is going to continue increasing. So that means that as the number of bikes increases, so does the price. So that's A. As the number of bikes produced increases, so does the cost. Okay. Number 9 is also an interpretation of a graph problem. It is asking us to find the domain and the range. So remember, for domain, we look from left to right. So we want the furthest value to the left and the furthest value to the right. And domain deals with the x-axis. So the farthest to the left we have here is 0. And the farthest to the right we have here is 80. So that means we're looking at options A and C. Range then, remember, you look from the bottom to the top. And it deals with the y-axis. So the lowest point on our graph is right here, which is about somewhere between 10 and 20. And I think the problem here says 17. So we're going to do 17. That's what's in our two options. And the highest value is right here, just above 50. So it says in the problem all the options are 52. So we'll go from 17 to 52. So that means we're looking at option C. Okay? That's number 9. Number 10 is a constructed response question. You have to show your work for this one. It's very simple. So sketch a graph that has x-intercepts at 1 and 3. So that means on the x-axis, you're going to put a point at +1 and +3. And it says you have a minimum at the point 2, -2. Well, a minimum means it's the lowest point on this graph, so your parabola should open up. Okay? And then we're just going to select the answer that best describes the graph we've just drawn. It opens up, the axis of symmetry is at 2, and we have a minimum. So that's option A. Okay? Number 11 is average rate of change. Remember, the word that we associate with average rate of change is slope. And the slope formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So we need some coordinates. So we need when x is 2, well, here's the point when that happens. And when x is 6, here's the point when that happens. So we got to go ahead and get their y coordinates. So when x is 2, the y coordinate is 16. When x is 6, the y coordinate is 0. So now I can go ahead and calculate my slope. y2 minus y1, that would be 0 minus 16. x2 minus x1, 6 minus 2. So I get negative 16 divided by 4, which is negative 4. Answer A. Okay. Number 12, which 1 hour period has the greatest average rate of change? Well, we got to look and see how much our table is changing for each increment. So, every time slot goes up by 1 hour. So we need to find the greatest temperature change. So to go from 65 to 68, you add 3 degrees. To go from 68 to 73, you add 5. And 73 to 76 is 3. So where did it change the most? Well, when it went up 5 degrees, which was from 11 to noon. 11 to 12 p.m. is answer B. Okay? Number 13. Here we go. Here's the problem. Describe the transformation from f of x equals the cubic root of x to g of x equals 1/2 times the cubic root of x plus 2 minus 4. So, your 1/2 here out in front, remember that value tells you if it's stretched or shrunk. Now, since 1/2 is less than 1, that means your graph shrinks. Okay? So I'm going to, I can't eliminate any of them because they all say shrink. So now we got to look at our shifts. Remember, your shift with the x is your left or your right. And since that one is always opposite, if it's plus 2, that means left 2. So the only option that says that would be C. But let's double check the last part. The plus k at the end is your vertical shift, and it's true. So if it's minus 4, that means down 4. And option C does say that. So we're good. Answer for number 13 is C. Okay. Number 14, describe the transformation from the parent function to the transformed function. Now, a lot of you had questions about which one is the first graph or the original, and which one is the new graph. Well, remember, your original function always starts at the origin. So that's why this is your original function right here. To get to the new function, all we did was move up 1 unit. We did not move left or right. So the answer is B. Okay? Number 15. Describe the transformation from f of x equals the absolute value of x to g of x equals 2 times the absolute value of x plus 3. Well, describe means we should actually write down what's happening. So this 2 out front, remember that's your A value. It tells you if it opens up or down and if it's stretched or shrunk. So since it's positive, this graph opens up. And the 2, since it's greater than 1, means it's being vertically stretched. Okay? Something else is happening though, too. We have the x plus 3. And if it's attached to the x or if it's inside the bars, that is your horizontal shift. And remember, that's the one that's always opposite. So since it's plus 3, that actually means your vertex is at negative 3. And there's no plus or minus k at the end, so your vertex remains at 0. So I'm going to write down that the graph moves left 3. It does not move up or down. So the next thing we need to do is sketch both functions. So our parent function, f of x, remember, origin at 0, 0, and then it just opens up. Okay, slope of 1 over 1 on either side. Our new function we said moves left 3, so I'm going to plot the new vertex at negative 3, 0. And it opens up and has been stretched. Stretched by a factor of 2, so that means it should be twice as narrow, so thinner. So when I draw this, I'm going to make sure that I'm clearly drawing it to be twice as narrow. So it should look something like that. Okay? Make sure that you have a description in words of what's happening and that you've graphed both of the functions. All right, number 16. What is the new equation? Well, it tells us that our original equation is the square root function. So g of x equals the square root of x. And now I'm going to leave some blanks here. So it says, translated 7 units right and 3 units up. That means my new vertex is positive 7, positive 3. And it's vertically stretched by a factor of 3. So remember, your vertical stretch goes out front. And then your vertex goes in for h and k. So your x, your horizontal shift is always opposite. So since in our vertex it's a positive 7, we're going to put it into the equation as minus 7. And then your vertical shift is the same as what you see. So since it's a positive 3, we're going to put plus 3 at the end. And when you look at all 3 of your options, you should notice that that's not an option. So that's why the answer was D. The answer I have is not listed above, but please know that this is the correct equation for number 16. Okay? Number 17, we're looking for the graph that shows the function 3 times x minus 5 times x minus 2. So the first thing I look at is my leading coefficient 3. Since it's positive, that means my graph has to open up. So I'm going to eliminate C and D because those graphs open down. Okay? Now what I'm looking at are the x-intercepts. Since the factors are x minus 5 and x minus 2, my zeros, or my x-intercepts, should be positive 5 and positive 2. And the only graph that shows that is B. Here's the x-intercept at positive 2. Here's the x-intercept at positive 5. So that's the answer for 17. Okay? Number 18 wants us to factor this quadratic equation. But the way it's written right now, we don't like it. We need everything on one side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 40 from both sides so that I can move it over to the left. And when I rewrite my equation then, it's 4x squared plus 12x minus 40 equals 0. Okay? The second thing I'm looking at is all of my terms are divisible by 4, which is our leading coefficient. So I'm going to divide everything by 4 to make it a little bit smaller. So 4 divided by 4 is 1x squared. 12 divided by 4 is plus 3x. Negative 40 divided by 4 is minus 10 equals 0. So this is my new function now that I'm working with. And I need to factor that. So to factor it, we use our x in box method. So I'm going to draw my x. And in the top of the x is pack, and the bottom sum b. So what does that mean? Well, pack means product of A, this is A, times C. This is C. So x squared times negative 10 is negative 10x squared. B is positive 3x. For the two wings of the x then, we're looking for factors of negative 10 that add up to 3. So what are the factors of 10? Well, we have 1 times 10 and 2 times 5. But to make it multiply to a negative 10, one of those factors has to be negative, and we have to add up to the positive 3 down in the bottom of our x. So the only way we're going to get that is with a positive 5 and a negative 2. So in my x then, I'm going to put negative 2x, positive 5x. Negative 2 times 5 is going to give me a negative 10 in the top. Negative 2 plus 5 is going to give me a positive 3 on the bottom. Okay? Now I'm going to go to my x, or my box. And in my first box goes my first term, 1x squared, first term from up here. In my last box goes the last term, negative 10. And then in the other two boxes go the two factors from the x, negative 2x and positive 5x. Okay? Now we're going to factor out the greatest common factor of each row and column. So what can I factor out of x squared and negative 2x? Only 1x. What can I factor out of 5x and negative 10? Only a positive 5. What can I factor out of x squared and 5x? Only 1x. What can I factor out of negative 2x and negative 10? I can factor out a negative 2. So my factors are x plus 5 times x minus 2. To get the zeros, it's whatever's going to make each of these factor equal 0. So what's going to cancel out the positive 5 if x is negative 5? What's going to cancel out the negative 2 if x is positive 2? So what answer does that match up with? Well, that matches up with option A. Okay? That's number 18. Number 19 asks us to find the axis of symmetry, AOS. Well, we have a formula for that. That's the one formula we have to memorize, and it is x equals the opposite of b divided by 2 times a. And remember that in your equation, your coefficient on the x squared term is a, your coefficient on the x term is b, and your constant is c. So when you go to calculate this now, x equals, our current b value is in positive 28. So the opposite of that is negative 28 divided by 2 times our a value is 2. Okay? So we get negative 28 divided by 2 times 2 is 4. Negative 28 divided by 4 is negative 7. So our axis of symmetry is x equals negative 7, which is C. Okay? Number 20 says Mark was practicing kicking the ball for the Key Club kickball tournament. The path of Mark's kick is modeled by the equation D equals negative 3t squared plus 18t, where t is the time the ball is in the air and d is the vertical distance in feet of the kick. The question says, find the maximum height of Mark's kick. So you need to think to yourself here, finding the maximum, what do you have to do? Well, if you think about or visualize the kick, the ball goes up and comes down. The maximum is found at the very top of that parabola, and it happens to be located on the axis of symmetry. So we can use that axis of symmetry formula to help us find the coordinates of that maximum, the vertex. Okay? And to get the x value, that's where the axis of symmetry formula comes in handy, because it's x equals opposite of b divided by 2a. So I'm going to go up to my formula. A is the negative 3, b is the 18. So opposite of b will be a negative 18 divided by 2 times a was negative 3. So I get negative 18 over negative 6, which is positive 3. So that means the x-coordinate of the vertex, which is the maximum, is 3. But that's not the maximum value itself. The maximum value comes from the y-coordinate. So in order to get that, I need to take this 3, because that's the time, and plug it back into the original formula. So d, the distance, the height of the kick, is -3 times t was 3, that's also x, squared, plus 18 times 3. Now remember, order of operations says you have to do the exponent first. So we have to do the 3 squared first, which is 9. 3 times 3 is 9. So -3 times 9 plus 18 times 3 is 54. -3 times 9 is -27. Plus 54 is a positive 27. So that makes the y-coordinate of your vertex 27, which is the maximum. So the answer to the question, find the maximum height of the kick, the maximum height was 27 feet. Okay? That one required you to show all of your work. So make sure that you do that. Okay? All right, the last question then. A water balloon is launched straight up into the air from the ground. The height h depends on the time t that the water balloon is in the air. The equation h equals -8t squared plus 56t models the height of the water balloon. Okay, so I'm going to put a box around this very important equation they gave us. Then it says when, that's a key word, will the water balloon first, another key word, be 96 feet above the ground. So they are not asking us for a maximum height here. So we do not need the vertex. So we do not need the axis of symmetry. They're asking us for when. So in this equation, h equals -8t squared plus 56t. The variable that tells us when is t. So we're solving for t. First thing I'm going to do, though, is plug in for h, 96 is the height. So 96 equals -8t squared plus 56t. Well, in order to solve for t, we have to factor. Well, I don't like the equation the way it is right now. First, I want to get the -8t squared to be positive. So I'm going to move both of these terms over to the left. So that means I have to add 8t squared. So I get a positive 8t squared. And I have to subtract 56t. I already have a positive 96 on the left. And that leaves me with 0 on the right. Okay? The next thing I don't like about this equation is that all those numbers are so big. So I'm going to go ahead and divide everything by 8 to make it a little bit smaller. So 8 divided by 8 is 1t squared. -56 divided by 8 is -7t. And 96 divided by 8 is positive 12 equals 0. Now this is the new equation I'm going to use, and the numbers are much nicer to work with. So in order to factor, we need to set up the x in box. So inner x is, in the top is pack, and the bottom sum b, pack sum b. So what does pack stand for again? Product of a times c. T squared times 12 is 12t squared. What is b? Sum b is -7t. So I'm looking for factors of 12 that add up to -7. So the factors of 12 are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. So how could I get a -7? Well, I look at this, and if I add 3 plus 4, I could get a positive 7. But I need a negative 7. So I need to make both of those negative. Negative 3t and negative 4t. A negative times a negative will still multiply to the positive 12, but they'll add up to the negative 7, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so next I'm going to go set up the box. In the first box goes the first term from the original equation, the t squared. In the last box goes the last term from the original equation, positive 12. And then in the other two boxes go our two factors, negative 3t and negative 4t. And now I need to factor out the greatest common factor of each row and each column. So what is the greatest common factor of t squared and negative 3t? 1t. Greatest common factor of negative 4 and 12? Negative 4, because the box closest to the outside here was negative. T squared and negative 4t, you can factor out a 1t. And negative 3t and 12, again, you can take the negative 3 because the box closest to the outside is negative. So your factors are t minus 4 times t minus 3. That means our t, to get these to be 0, to get rid of a negative 4, t has to be a positive 4. To get rid of a negative 3, t has to be a positive 3. But we can only pick one of these answers. And if you look at the multiple choice, both 3 and 4 are both there. So that's where you have to go back to the question. The question says, when will the water balloon first be 96 feet above the ground? Well, which time occurs first? 3 seconds. Okay, so that's why the answer is B, 3 seconds. All right. Please make sure that you are studying. This is so important because your CBA, if you are in hours 1, 2, 3, or 4, is happening on Tuesday, November 3rd. Or if you are in hours 5, 6, 7, or 8, is on November 4th. Okay? You're going to be getting your second practice test to work on over the 5-day weekend. If you get stuck on any of those questions, come back to this practice test and look at how you solved them to help you solve them on your second practice test. Thank you.